Does your squat look like this? Or worse, like this? Let's work on getting deeper. Hey crew, Coach Josh here with GarageGangGyms.com, and today we're talking about how to get you to squat deeper without pain and without doing a billion mobility exercises. Chances are you have enough mobility because this probably isn't the first video you've stumbled upon and you've worked on all these other things, but it's still not quite happening for you. So we're gonna see if we can get you deeper without having to worry about all that mobility, and I'm gonna teach you exactly how to do it. So I've actually broken up this video into quite a few chunks. So after you've watched this entire video and you come back and you're going to use it as a reference, just in the description below, I've labeled each chunk so that you can get to exactly where you need to so that you can get this squat going. So again, we're going to break it up into a few parts. I'm first going to explain to you a squat in maybe a way that you've never heard it before, because sometimes a coach's cues can be a little different. Then we're gonna dive into exactly how to get you from the squats that you saw at the beginning of this video into this squat, and exactly how I would teach you if you were standing in front of me as a client. From there, we're gonna do actual drills. We're actually gonna practice this. We're gonna get a little weight in our hands so that we can start mastering this. We'll talk about tempo and other ways to actually implement this into your training so that you can continue to go on. And then at the end, I'm gonna show you 2 different ways I would implement this into my own training if I were doing back squats or something like that. So let's talk about this squat. Now, most of you have probably heard it before. You're gonna stand nice and tall. You're gonna bend at both your knees and your hips as you go down. But most people, they get trapped in the idea of trying to go down, go down, go down, go down. And that's where this second squat that you saw in the beginning happens. You're going to try to sit down more because you don't quite understanding what needs to happen below the knee in order to get you deeper. So that's what we're going to talk about. What happens below your knees? Because your knees and your hips can't do all of the bending. We need to get those ankles involved. So first thing I want to talk about before we talk about bending your ankles and bringing your knees forward and things like that is what's going on with your heel. So the best way I would describe this to you is imagine your heel is a bowl, okay? It's upside down, but imagine it's a bowl. It's round, okay? Now, oftentimes, and you can experiment with this even as I'm talking, oftentimes when we stand or when we're setting up for a squat, we have a tendency in that bowl to favor one side or the other of that bowl, right? The one side edge or the other side edge. And usually it's the opposite per foot. So if you're on the inside of one foot, you're on the outside of the other foot. And if you're lined up like this, that means you're gonna be grinding down one side, and right around that parallel, it's gonna hurt if you try to go any lower. So let's fix that first. So when we're first learning, we can imagine that the bowl of our heel is very large, right? Very, very round, and really anywhere you are, you're gonna be fine when it comes to squatting. But as we get better and more proficient, that cup is gonna start to almost turn into a triangle. You're gonna have less and less wiggle room to find the center of that heel, right? Because if we have the edge of your heel, we want to find the center and try to stay on that center. So you're going to hear me refer to staying on the center of your heel a lot. And again, when we're actually doing the demonstration and I'm showing you these squats, I want you to keep that in mind, and I'll bring it up. So again, we need to make sure our heel stays in contact, because when we actually start to bend that ankle and bring our shins forward, the tendency, and I'll show you this again when we're actually practicing this, is your heel is going to come up off of the ground. Even slightly is not great, and you're going to go into more of a crouch position. We'll talk about that as well. But as you get to parallel, so you started at the top, you break at the knee and the hip as you go down, then right about where you're getting stuck, either right above parallel or at parallel, and you're trying to get lower, what we need to do is we need to bend in our ankles more so that our shins can incline. So if this is my foot, this is my shin, we need our shin to go forward. Other people refer to it as pushing your knees forward, and I'm actually gonna reserve that cue for something later on in this video. So today we're thinking as I come down, once I get to about that parallel position, our shin would be like this, we need to increase that shin angle. But we can't let that heel come up, because again, then we'll be in that crouched weird position. So we need to figure out how to keep a flat pressure in our heel as we incline that shin. Okay, now before we even move on to demonstration, let's say you just stopped this video right now and you just said, oh, I just drive my shins forward. What happens is as your shins go forward, you have a tendency for your hips to follow along with it, okay? So when we started at the top, if this is your knees and this is your hip, we broke at both and then we can come down, right? Our hips come down as our knees go forward slightly. Well, as we go down, if we're increasing that shin angle, the tendency is for your hips to slide with it. And what that's going to do is, again, it's going to lift that heel up off of the ground. So as we get to about that parallel position, hips and knees, and we incline those shins a little bit further, we need to make sure that we try to keep our hips back. And what that's going to do is, as our hip stays fixated or slightly deviating back and our knee is still traveling forward because we're increasing that shin angle, then we're going to get even more of a stretch in our quads. You will get a lot deeper in your squat. You'll be safer because your heels will be flat, just like we'll talk about some more later. But you're going to get a huge stretch in those quadriceps. So at the bottom, you're really going to feel pressure. And that's something that so many people avoid or miss out on when it comes to squatting, is as you get closer to the bottom of your squat, the pressure in your legs, the pressure in your core should actually get more. It should be increased. Where a lot of people, as that pressure would increase, that's when they're going to just let their hips slide or they're going to cut their depth or whatever because it's uncomfortable. But in that pressure, the more pressure you can build in your muscles, in your core, the less that your joints have to absorb and the better position you're most likely going to have. So let's take these ideas and break them down and go into practice. Okay, before we actually dive into these technical things, I want to show you the difference between squatting and crouching, because they are going to look similar and you're going to be very, very likely to go into more of a crouch. So let's cover that first and then we'll get into these exercises. So a squat, our feet stay flat on the floor, right? We break at the knee and the hip. Our goal is to get lower than parallel. We're here, we stand up, and we can repeat, right? Again and again and again and again. This is a squat. A crouch, and again, this is likely to happen as we're working on bringing those shins forward. A crouch is we get to about that parallel point, and as we go down, our heels come up, and then we would stand back up. If you're crouching, your heels coming up, this is definitely going to cause some hip discomfort, some knee discomfort. Now, if you're a catcher in baseball, you're going to be in this crouch all the time, but it's not great to stand up through your toes like this. We don't have a whole lot of balance. And with our knees this far out in front of us, it's just not great to do again and again and again, especially if you're starting to add weight. That's why I really harp on the fact that your heels have to stay down. We're not necessarily pushing through your heels, but they have to stay down. Because even if they come up a little bit, so they're just barely up, that's putting my knees forward, my hips slid forward. Yes, I still have a little bit of quad tension, but man, there's not a whole lot of stability. I need to make sure that my heels stay down. I'm in a good squat position so that as I rise up, I can use my entire foot. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to some exercises. So we've got the theory out of the way. Now let's put these things into practice. So I'm gonna show you the squat, but I'm gonna pause right where you're probably struggling. And then I'll show you exactly how I'm going to do it. And then we're going to talk about different things to think about, how to add weight and how to actually make it easier for you. So again, for a lot of people when they're squatting, they start in a great posture. They hold good positions. They break at the knees and the hips. They're squatting down. And this is about as far as they get. Now, if we go back to the videos you saw before, if I try to just keep pushing my hips down, I'm going to have to rock back. My lower back is in a bad position. And then this is actually putting a lot of pressure on my hips in order to come up. Okay, so that's something we're trying to avoid, right? Because we're going to be increasing that shin angle. So I'm here. I'm going to break at the knees and hips. I'm trying to stay nice and tall. I'm going to get into that position. Now, from here, I need to find the edge of my heel. So I'm going to kind of play around. Okay, I've found the middle of my heel and my whole foot is flat. Great. My legs are burning here, by the way. Yours will be too. From here, I'm going to initially push my shins forward. So I'm going to push my shins forward. But again, you can see my hips want to follow. So I'm going to try to keep my hips back using my core, and my shins are going to go forward. And this is where I'm going to try to squat. Then I can stand up, shake out my legs, right? You may only go an inch lower than normal because the pressure becomes so great. Maybe you feel like you're rocking onto your toes a little bit. That's totally fine. As we do more and more of these repetitions, it's going to get better as you kind of build into this. So again, I'm starting nice and tall. My legs and knees are locked out. I find that edge of my heel up here already. I'm going to break at the knees and hip. I'm going to go until I would normally be. I'm going to pause, making sure I'm on a good edge in my heel. My core is on. Then again, I'm going to bend my shins, pushing my shins forward, keeping my hips back. Okay, I got a little bit lower this time. Boy, are my legs burning. But again, I'm nice and active with my feet. They're nice and planted, and then I can stand up. Now, as we get deeper and deeper, like I said in the beginning of this video, I'm going to reserve the knees forward cue for right now. When we get to the bottom of the squat, I'm going to invite you to think about pushing your knee forward and down. Think of it like a waterfall. So my knee is going to go forward and down. And what that's going to do is, assuming I try to maintain the same posture, it's going to keep all the pressure on my quadriceps, and my glutes are going to help lift my torso. Rather than most people, when they come up out of this position, because their quads are burning, what are they going to do? They're going to push their knees back, right? They're going to push their knees back. They're going to incline their torso, puts all the pressure in their glutes and a lot into their back, but not into their quads. Then they squat a bunch and they say, why aren't my quads getting better? Because you're not using them. So again, what we're going to do, find that edge. I'm happy with that. I'm going to break at the knees and hips. I'm going to get to where I would normally stop. I'm going to bring my shins forward, okay? Hips are in a good place. Now I'm thinking about that waterfall. Knees are going to go forward, down. As I keep my chest in position, my quads stay on and I stand all the way up. Let's try that again. So I break at the knees and hips. I pause. I bring my shins forward. I push my knees forward and down, and that brings me up. Now that brings me to a point. If when you're squatting, you have a habitual knee pop, right? You stand up, pop. You stand up, pop, again and again and again. Chances are what's happening is you're losing pressure in some way, shape, or form. So what do I mean by that? On the way down, as you're squatting, we're taking our upper leg, our femur, and trying to bring it down towards our calf. We get to about here. Then, by pushing our shin forward, we're going to sandwich our knee, basically, right? We're going to really compress in that knee. But as you stand up, if your weight shifts any which way, because maybe you're standing up too quickly, you're going to pivot in that knee a little bit, and that's going to provide space for a pop to happen. Sometimes it happens at the top of our squat, so we stand up, and maybe when we get to about here, we just kind of relax and we stop pushing against the floor, and then we just straighten our knees, and then we get this pop. So if you're having a habitual pop, you need to slow down your ascent on the way up. So it'll look something like this. So we're nice and tall. Again, found that edge. I'm going to pause. Bloop. Shins are going to go forward. I'm going to push like a waterfall forward and down. Slow, keeping my quads on. No pop. Back down. Pause. Shins go forward. Push. No pop. Okay, now let's say you're not getting very low. You feel a little awkward. Maybe you feel like your knees are caving in because you can't quite keep that edge. This is when we could stand on plates or a platform. So I'm going to get both, and then I'm going to show you how you can use these. Okay, so using plates, we just set them on the floor. I'm just barely going to put my heel on them. Now, if you're using plates, I highly recommend you do it in your stockings, these squats, because the one benefit of plates versus the ramp, which I'll show you in a second, is it has that hard edge, right? It just drops off. So it gives you a little digging into your heel, which if you're still struggling with that heel pressure or what edge you're on, the plates are really going to give you that feedback that you're going to want. So again, I found the middles of my heels. Now, because I elevated my heels, whether using plates, a ramp, or even squatting shoes, because I elevated them, my angles are going to change slightly, so just be aware of that. And the tendency as we're first learning to let those hips go along with your knees is going to go up. You're going to have more of a tendency to be up on your toes in a crouched position. So we're going to break at the knees and hips. As I'm squatting, I'm really trying to keep everything still. I get to that pause point. I'm gonna bring my shins forward. Now again, my heels are elevated, so now I just squatted much, much lower than I was without the heel elevation, right? Still nice and tall. There's a lot of compression in my legs. I'm active in this position. Same concept, I'm gonna push my knees forward and down. And again, because you're on these plates, the tendency for your heels to really lift up increases. Your tendency to lean forward is going to increase because those plates are kind of pushing you forward a little bit. So something to be aware of. So once again, I break, I'm tall, I pause, I bring my shins forward, that lowers me down, I'm still nice and tall, I can push down, and I can stand up. So let's see what that looks like with a ramp. A ramp, a slant board, whatever you want to call it, that's what we're going to use. The nice thing about this is we have a gradual decline, and if I need extra heel height, I can certainly get it. Keep in mind though, a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to start super high on this ramp and squat. For most people, you're not ready for that, okay? Just like when you're doing any strength training, we want to gradually build in intensity. Well, think every millimeter up on this ramp that we go, the deeper we're likely to squat. Now, if we go from barely breaking parallel to, butt literally touching the floor and there's no time in between those depths, the amount of joint pain and things like that could go way up, okay? Just because you're not ready for that, you're not comfortable with that yet. So again, we're gonna just slightly put our heels on if we're using a ramp. Same rules apply. I gotta find that good edge of my heel. Sometimes with the ramp, the tendency is to really fan out and feel the outside edges. We wanna be in the middles of our feet. I'm gonna break at the knee and hip. I'm gonna pause, shins go forward, and I'm nice and relaxed. I can push my knees forward and up as I stand up, right? Okay, so now let's talk about how to make this a little bit harder. Few ways we can do this. Number one, when you're first learning, more time in these positions is what I want you to do. So tempo. Maybe you take your time getting to that parallel point, and then you take an extra 1 or 2 seconds to get down to your bottom point, even if it's just an inch. You're gonna pause there for maybe 2 seconds and then stand up only under control. If you stand up too fast, again, your tendency is gonna be to be all over the place. So maybe you do 6 sets of 4 really slow tempos. So it looks something like this. So I would go break, nice and tall. Maybe I stop at parallel because I'm still working on that. Bring those shins involved, pause, and then drive up. And maybe I would do that 3 or 4 repetitions. Then once I'm really comfortable with the tempo, then I would start to implement some type of a dumbbell. I'm gonna show you what's called a goblet squat. I wouldn't go right to a barbell at this point because you're still kind of figuring this out. We're gonna put a little bit of weight in your hands, which is gonna kind of change your positions just a little bit and force you to have to own these new positions before we'd ever touch a barbell. So let's get a dumbbell. Okay, so the dumbbell squat, this is a great opportunity to improve our front squat if we do front squats. And the way I like to do it is I grab the outside edges of the dumbbell, I push my elbows in front. Now what this is gonna do is this goblet's gonna want me to push my hips a lot more forward. So if I'm on this platform, my hips are gonna wanna slide with my shins. So it's really important as I'm squatting that I'm thinking about keeping my hips under control so that my legs can do the stretching. So I get paused, maybe I push my shins forward, keeping my hips back, my legs are on fire, then I can push down with my knees, right? And we can continue that as a tempo. And eventually, the tempo is gonna be really exhausting. It's gonna be very tough to add more weight to. Then it's really crucial to slowly back out of that tempo. So let's say we were going down for 5 seconds, we pause for 2 and then come up. Maybe after 2 weeks of that, we go down for 3 seconds and pause for 1. Then we go down for 3 seconds and try to time out that bottom and no pause. Then eventually we just go through our squat like we would normally do. We take our breath, we squat, we activate those shins moving forward, and then we're up. We're down, and we're up. Now that's also a great way to work that pause out. Eventually, you don't want to be pausing at parallel and then thinking, oh, push my shins forward, keep my heels down, all those things. You want to be able to flow through it. And when you're doing the tempos, really try to work that flow as soon as you can, keeping those heels down and that good heel, that heel edge, that flat heel. And once you can flow through it, then you can start adding more weight and standing up. Once you get to the point where you're using a pretty significant dumbbell, where after doing 4 or 5 reps, it's starting to get challenging just to hold on to for 6 sets of 4, and maybe you're not doing tempo anymore, that's the time to implement the barbell. So let's go to that next. So trying to add some depth to your back squat, we have to treat it just like we did when we were doing the goblet, the dumbbell with the slant board, all of that. What we want to do is we want to start with a tempo, and maybe for a few weeks, we're going to do sets of 3, 4, 5. We're going to take a good breath. We're not going to pause at parallel like we were practicing. We're just going to slowly descend, trying to keep our feet flat, making sure that bar stays over our ankle as much as possible, and really incorporating good bottom position. Now, the weights we use when we're doing these tempos have to be pretty dang easy. If you can squat, say 200 pounds, maybe you do this with 95 for your first few weeks, because we're adding more weight than we would have with goblets. And again, we're still trying to strengthen this bottom position. If you were stuck at parallel for a long time, you've only been doing below parallel for a short period of time. And if we rush through the learning process and the strengthening process, then it's going to actually hold us back in the long run. As you crave heavier weights with your back squat and wanting to get back to getting strong, you're going to eventually take that tempo and the pause away. But just like we talked about with the slant board, with the dumbbells, we want to slowly remove that tempo and slowly remove the pause. So you can see in these back squats, I'm going down somewhat slow, not as slow as the last ones, but I'm trying to time out that bottom position perfectly so that I can do that waterfall with my knees, right? I get all the way down there, I drive my knees forward, trying to maintain that same torso angle. So there you have it, guys. We talked a little bit about theory. We worked some drills and how you can kind of implement it into your own training, slowly using a platform if you have one, plates if you got to use them, how to use some weights, and then eventually how to incorporate this into your barbell training if you do barbell at all. So if you guys like content like this, please like this video, share it with your friends, because I'm sure you're not the only one squatting. Please subscribe to this channel so you guys don't miss out on any future videos that I'm doing. I really like to take these deep dives that maybe I would teach a client in person and give it to you guys. This is Coach Josh with Garage Gang Gyms. I'll see you guys next time.